Sounds good.
Hello, everybody. I have a wonderful, wonderful guest on today. Megs is a professional organizer with ADHD. So we are going to jump into adult ADHD, specifically women. I have some myself. My son has it. My dad has it. We're going to dive in. It's super fascinating. And she is passionate about helping others unlock their potential. And she loves transforming chaotic spaces into organized havens, inspiring creativity and peace. And beyond physical organization, Megs teaches mindset shifts, and self-belief to empower ADHD brain. So we're going to talk about what is an ADHD brain. I know that as we go through this menopausal journey, more and more women get diagnosed with some form of ADHD, and it's not a bad thing. It's like learning how to use that brain. That's all. And as a speaker, she shares her message that ADHD is a superpower. There you go. When not organizing, Megs enjoys her family, her pets, her yoga, and personal growth. So thank you so much. We've done a podcast swap. I love it when we can do that. And welcome to my show.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are welcome. Okay, so let's just dive right in and then you can kind of unfold your story as you go along. But what for somebody who's not listening, what is HD or see, I'm doing it. We were just talking about how I flip I have slight dyslexia as well. ADHD. What is ADHD?
So, as a non-medical professional and non-expert in the space of diagnosis, I'll tell you what my experience with ADHD has been. So, it's ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, and it's known as ADHD is known for something that affects little boys. And so more recently, there's been a lot of women getting diagnosed with ADHD and even more men later in life as they come to understand what that looks like. And through my own research, I discovered that ADHD used to be thought of as a thing that you grow out of, and eventually it just goes away into adulthood. But we find, especially nowadays, that that's not necessarily the case. So I got diagnosed about 2 years ago, and originally I didn't necessarily know what it meant. I had seen some of the memes going around. I had talked about it with my neighbor, who ultimately prompted me to go get diagnosed. But when I first found out, I was like, okay, I don't really know what this means. And she likely doesn't know what she's talking about. There's no way I have ADHD. There's no way that this thing has been affecting me my whole life. And it wasn't until I read the book Faster Than Normal by Peter Shankman that I really started to understand this as something that, oh my gosh, absolutely affected me and truly was something that I had to start to embrace. And so, people with ADHD, and I know myself included, have trouble with executive function, which means so if you have like a big task that needs to get done, breaking it down into smaller tasks to be able to essentially get that done. There's a lot of stuff that goes on with the brain, but I know that I sit in paralysis oftentimes when I feel like there's so much going on around me. I can't get up to get things done, even if it's as simple as, washing the dishes or doing the laundry. It's those little things like that that I have no interest in doing that are so incredibly difficult to do. At the same time, I have the ability to go into hyper focus mode, or I can get things done that I want to get done. And that's big things. Like I could redo my bathroom today if I wanted to. If I like allowed myself to get into that mode, absolutely. I could plant a new garden outside. Like if there's something that interests me, like my podcast or organizing, I could do it all freaking day long. But it's those little things that don't interest us that ultimately paralyze us. But as adults, we have to freaking do them, like pay our bills and get these things done. The way that Peter Shankman talks about it in the book is like our brains work faster than normal. It's kind of like driving a Ferrari, but you've never driven a Ferrari before, and now you've just been handed these keys and you're just like, what the heck do I do now? So the H in ADHD stands for hyperactivity. And sometimes that can be with your body, and a lot of times that can be with your brain. And so I've noticed both with myself. I know that there's tests you can take that like narrow it down to one versus the other, but I've noticed both with me. There's some days that I can just be like zooming around all day long and getting things done. But one thing that happens with the hyperactivity of the brain is like you could have the greatest idea in the world and then it's gone the next second. And you could have like a lightning, like not lightning, you could have, well, I guess so, like a lightning fast, incredible idea in your brain. But if you don't write it down, it's going to be gone forever. But that's the same when you're talking to someone. Like I will likely have a brain fart today. We could call it a brain fart, but I will likely think of this incredible idea and then it'll be gone. If I don't say it out loud or write it down in front of me, it will be gone forever. And so things like planning ahead or remembering birthdays or like having a schedule, if it's not written down, it's very hard for us to maintain any sort of sense of normalcy. I know for myself, I have a really hard time with habits. Like even as far as brushing my teeth, like I've been brushing my teeth my entire life. My teeth are very healthy, but still at night, sometimes before I go to bed, it is gut-wrenching to actually get up and go and brush my teeth. Whereas if I decided to, do a project like painting or make a sign or something, I like I could do that. Oh, brushing my teeth takes a minute. Okay. But doing this project over here is going to take me hours and keep me up all night. I could do that. I would choose that over brushing my teeth. It's crazy. But there's things that I've incorporated into my life now, like routine, that help me overcome a lot of these different things that I've dealt with my entire life. And so I think that's in a nutshell, just giving you a lot of experiences without talking about like the medical science of it, because there's a lot more that goes into it. And I think it's pretty fascinating. But those are some of the things that I deal with. And a lot of the things that I have now come to understand about myself and my own organization that I can teach others through coaching and through, being one-on-one with them, helping them understand like what is executive function. Sorry, my cat. Hey, that's enough. Um, just like understanding executive function and knowing that like we would love to live in a home that has less clutter. We want to live in a home that doesn't have all this stuff, but part of what comes along with being ADHD, I know with so many of the people that I've spoken to on my own podcast or in real life, is we get very emotionally attached to a lot of the stuff that's in our life. And it's very hard for us to move on from some of the things that have become the norm. And I've been talking forever, but one of the things that got me really passionate about organizing is just the fact that I grew up with so much stuff in my home, in my own room, and I didn't even know there was another way of living. I didn't realize how much that stuff was really clouding a life I was longing to live. And it wasn't until I started educating myself on the different ways to let go and understanding my own ADHD brain that I really realized how much of a difference having less could make in my life.
Yeah, we call those stressy messes where it's like the books are uneven and every time you walk by, it's like, oh God, I should do that. I should do that. I should do that. And it's just eating away, eating away. And then we do this in my membership where we just take a minute to go fix a stressy mess. Because sometimes it
Ooh,
doesn't take long. It's
yeah.
just, and then you're like, okay, that one's done. And I mean, it's not that that's it. And it's because there's always a stressy mess, but what you're trying to do is just stay on top of the stressy messes. And so what I hear from you is that, it's a spectrum, right? So there's people along a spectrum and it can affect us differently. Somebody can be more hyperactive, somebody can be more, or like organized or less organized. And it's really coming into how does it feel for you? Because I will say, I've been listening to your podcast, you know, a lot of times I just think everybody thinks like me, right? Because I don't know how other people think. Now I start to look at my husband and my children, and I'm very similar to James, who has ADHD, and not to my other son, Ian, who's more like my husband, who is methodical. They tend to talk slower. They talk about one thing for a very long time. I'm more like throw 10 things at you like a fire hose. And then, we're talking in 30-second chunks. It's challenging for me to stay on topic with conversation sometimes because my head is like a 100-story apartment building with 20 apartments on each floor, and I can actually feel the different communication going on in my head. And so quieting my mind can be very challenging. And I love what you said about hyper focus, because I can get in the kitchen all day and just zone right in and time is gone, but then ask me to do a simple task and I'm like, yeah, no, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah.
So how can women, like, and again, I believe you are on medication.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm not. So, and again, whatever people choose is absolutely up to them. And I think it's important to understand that, because again, it's varying degrees. And Megs and I talked about this in my last podcast, is that I don't know who I'd be without what I'm doing, because I've lived in this body for so long like this. And for somehow I've made things work as scattered as they are, right? And so maybe my life would be better. And so anyway, I'm in this kind of pondering stage. But what would you say to women who, like, do they come to you knowing they have ADHD, or are you talking to women and they're kind of like, do I have it? Do I not have it? What's kind of going on out there?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say actually a lot of my clients come to me just for help, and I do ask them if they have ADHD or not. And I would say about 50% of them say, well, after listening to your podcast, I think I might. And then half of them are like, yeah, I definitely do. And half of them are like, okay, now I'm like splitting them up into thirds. But some people even tell me, I don't think I do, but I would really love to hear more about what you have to say, because a lot of it still rings true in what I'm doing in my own life. And so, yeah, it's very different depending on the person. I think the biggest thing with ADHD, whether you get a diagnosis or not, is just more accepting of the way your brain might work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are the type of person who constantly forgets the things that are going on in their life, like appointments, like doing the laundry, things like that, then that's where you start to adopt the idea of, okay, if I am forgetting this all day long, I do need to know that I have to write it down, right? I've got to find a way where I can write it down in one spot so I can come back to this, so that I can find a sense of normalcy in my life. There's systems we can create that support us, especially in this world full of technology and AI. There's so many different things that we can automate to support us through. And so I will say I never diagnose. I am not a diagnoser, nor do I ever want to be, but I do simply just ask questions to say like, "Hey, have you ever noticed yourself doing this? This could be a possible solution for that." And one thing that I talk to my clients about is being time blind. People with ADHD often, like you said, I can go into the kitchen and then I don't even know what time it is, right? Like you get so hyper focused on the things that you're doing that time escapes you. But the same with the little tasks too. We look at those little tasks and we're like, I don't want to do that. But if we start to assign time frames to them, it makes it easier to grasp and to understand that those little things we can do, because it really takes us little to no time at all. And we're sometimes just putting it off
Mm-hmm.
because we're going to avoid it until the last possible second.
Which,
So
which
super
what
interesting.
I've learned is, because I'd like to go into the brain a little bit, because the executive function, right? So I noticed when my kids were smaller and I had no idea about any of this, I would create drama, like chaos, let's call it chaos, to get out the door, because then I was firing up my brain in a way that needed me to move forward. And then I would start to see
Yeah.
this with my child, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. And I think it's really important, because you can't change a behavior until you're aware, like really aware
Oh,
of the behavior. So I didn't
totally.
realize I was creating this chaos, which was helping me to actually function, to get out the door. And I can't explain it. If you get what I'm saying, you understand it. If you
I
don't, what
do.
are you guys talking about? But anyway, but now I've learned where I don't need to do the same thing because I really understand my brain better. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like what's
Yeah, for sure. I've always been in a rush my whole life, especially I used to be late to everything constantly because I would never really evaluate the time that it would take to get ready and factor in traffic and all of this other stuff. I would just say, what's point A to point B and like let me get there. I was always late. In fact, I think my brother-in-law, even at our wedding, joked about my husband and I always being late to everything. It was a real thing. So I notice now when I'm rushing, because I often do rush to try to get things done, I ask myself now, why am I doing this? And I think it's a really good awareness technique to say, am I actually in a rush? Like, I'll give you a good example. My husband and I have established a new routine as our girls go back to school. Let me be honest. I established a routine. I was like, all of y'all follow this, okay?
yeah.
And everybody's falling in line, right? But we told our girls we wanted them to be in bed by 8 p.m. every single night. Now, 8 p.m. is the deadline, and now I'm getting stressed out if they're not in bed by 8 p.m. I start getting more angry or frustrated because now we've missed our deadline and now I'm in a rush to get them to bed, right? And one thing that I've also taught myself is that I I can't control anyone's reactions around me. I can only control myself and the actions that I show up with. So if I show up more stressed and more chaotic and frustrated at my children, guess what? I'm going to be met with that same kind of reaction back. But if I go into a situation knowing that I can only control myself, I'm going to try to control my breath, only focus on my own reactions to things and situations, then it's a little bit different. So anyways, I we're trying to get the girls in bed by 8 for a couple days in a row. It just wasn't working out. Yes, we did get them down, but it was met with a lot of ridiculousness. So
Mhm.
then one day I was like, why am I rushing to get them into bed? We're getting them to bed. They're getting a good night's sleep. It's not as if I mean, we would get them in bed by 8. They're sleeping till 6:30. That is a good chunk of time to sleep. I don't know how much sleep kids need, but they're getting sleep, whether they get into bed by 8:30 or 9. So this one night I was finally like, what if we just relaxed and we
Mhm.
just like got to bed gradually? And so like we were still aiming for 8, but 8 came and went. I didn't make a big fuss of it. We ended up doing something as a family that we wouldn't have normally done because we were so focused on getting to bed that I think we ended up playing a game or something that just brought us together. And then getting to bed was so peaceful.
Mhm.
And it was just such a reminder that it's okay if we're not rushing to get to everything.
Mhm.
There's a woman that I follow on social media, on TikTok and Instagram. Her name is ADHD Jenna Free or Jenna Free ADHD. I interviewed her on my podcast, and she's wonderful. She talks a lot about regulating yourself and taking the time to just recognize when you're in the moment and trying to rush through things, even as simple as washing the dishes. Do you try to rush through that to get to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing? Because our brains are often going at the speed that our bodies cannot keep up with.
Mhm.
And so at the end of the day, even if we've done 20 or 30 things that we can check off our to-do list, we're saying we didn't do enough because we didn't go as fast as our brain. And so again, just having that realization that it's okay to slow down it's fascinating. So thanks for asking that because my husband was rushing our kids the other day and I was like, but why? But like, and we try to give ourselves code words when we're talking in front of the kids so that like we can check in with each other, but not like undermine one another while we're in front of the kids. So that's been a journey as well. But yeah, And you know what? My 7-year-old called us out on it the other night too. She was like, Mom, we're not in a rush to get anywhere. And I was like, gosh, you're a brilliant child. And thank you for calling me out it because I've been bringing it up and talking about these things. So now we're all supporting each other through the non-rushing journey of our lives. What
Yeah,
the heck are we rushing for?
I can
Like,
definitely agree with that because like when I go to the bathroom in a public place, like I am in and out before the next person's gone. Like I don't know, it's a rush. Everything is like it's fast. I have to do this fast. I gotta get this done. And I have absolutely over the years asked myself, why am I rushing? Why?
yeah,
Why? But it's like you said, it's this program that until you look at it, sometimes you don't even know you're rushing. And
yeah.
what I get done in a day seems normal to me. And when I tell other people, they're like, oh my God, how do you get all that done? But I just do. I don't know, but I can waste a lot of time too and get very unfocused
Oh, yeah,
and do nothing, which is really doing something because we're never not doing anything.
yeah,
So yeah, very interesting to notice. And again, that rushing can come from that needing that adrenaline, which is a chemical, right? Where we're like, okay, everybody just slow down and be more present, connect to the breath. Let's not heighten our voices. That's a practice. That's a real practice to do that.
And I think that's, I want to highlight that word, practice,
Mm,
is we want to do these things in our life where we're good at it right away. But
mm,
the truth is if we've never practiced it before, it's going to feel very unfamiliar at first. And so showing up and just practicing the behavior is really all it takes, no matter how bad you are at it. And it's not about the consistency of it because you're going to miss a day, especially if you're not used to it. It's more about the continuity of it. Are you continuously reminding yourself that this is something you want to adopt in your life? Practice it and move forward because you will grow, you will get better.
you will get better. I have definitely, the tagline on my book, Cookie Dough in the Dark, is a journey to a vibrant living. Like slow
Mm,
down, you have your whole life ahead of you. Enjoy the ride, practice, practice, practice. That's it. It's just, it is, it's continual practice. How can I get a little bit better? How can I notice this? How can I change this? What do I want to focus on? Because we can't do it all at once either.
yeah.
Do you find there was a difference between being on medication and not being on medication?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Um, I think a lot of women that I've noticed and through research have been diagnosed with anxiety or depression rather than ADHD.
Hmm?
And so after I had had my girls, I was diagnosed with postpartum depression twice.
Hmm.
And the first time I decided not to take any medicine, and that was really, really hard. The second time I did find a medicine that was right for me. And then so throughout the years after having my daughter, who's now 5, I struggled trying to take the right depression medication. And it really helped with anxiety. And really, that was my biggest thing was the anxiety of it. I was constantly thinking of all of these things that could go wrong
Oh,
instead of thinking about all of these things that could go right. And I think that that's something that we often struggle with, but we don't talk about as a society because it doesn't feel right. And so that postpartum was really hard and it's actually research shows that a lot of women who have ADHD they're more prone to get postpartum depression at the same time. So super super interesting, but when I got diagnosed with ADHD, I agreed to taking medicine, but then there was so much negative stigma about the medication in the news, in the social media, all of these different things that I started to put myself down and I started to notice like all of these different things about myself that I don't know, I just saw as a negative thing. Like instead of working on my reactions to certain situations, I would start to blame that on the medicine. And everybody has their own experience with medicine. This is just my own. So I ended up stopping the medicine for a couple months at a time. And uh, I went through a journey of just recognizing how my body was reacting in certain situations, talked to my doctor about it, and then I got back on the medicine. And the second time I started taking it, I said to myself, I'm like, this is no one's journey but my own, and I'm only going to recognize how it's working for me. I don't need to hear this negative person over here. I don't need to hear this negative person over here. I'm only going to start to understand what it does for me in a positive way. And I think part of taking medicine for me was just understanding how my brain works too. Because like if I were just taking medicine and expecting my life to be completely different, that would be one thing. But taking medicine, but then also accompanying it with understanding that I have problems with executive function, I have trouble with being time blind. All of those things help me to work with my medicine a little bit more. And at this point, I now no longer have to take antidepressants because I have been working so much on myself and on my body that I recognize when I'm going into that mode. And I have different things that I do to get out of that mode. Now, I've been practicing meditation and yoga and walking for a really long time that I can do that. But there was a very long time that I couldn't, which is why I needed the medicine in that time. And so I think like medication for myself has been a fascinating journey because I used to think that it was just a solution to the problem. But without doing the additional work and the other things that come along with it, it's only really masking what's there. And so yeah, this mindfulness journey that I've been on, like I teach manifestation, and that's something that I started doing last year because it just really helped me understand my underlying beliefs of a lot of the things that I do. And it helped me, yeah, it just really helped me understand myself a lot more. But
Mm.
again, like coming back, I've done a lot of the work, like the mindfulness work. And so if you're listening and you're on this journey yourself, it's okay that you don't automatically think, let me go take a walk to combat my depression right now. Like that's not a thing for everyone. It's okay to take medicine if that's what you need in the moment. And it's okay to try what makes sense for you. And again, like it's everyone's got their own personal journey. And so if you're getting like bombarded with everyone telling you to do this and do that, then don't listen to anyone. Listen to what you need. Listen to what you're working on your doctor with. And if you don't want to take medicine, that's totally cool too, right? There's other ways to figure it out for yourself. So that's
Yeah.
been my journey. It's been really interesting. But yeah, I would say medicine helps me focus for sure on the things that I don't want to do, especially with my business. Like there's stupid, mundane little tasks that I have to do because I'm running this entire company myself. And and there's things that I know how to do and how to get done because I've got these other tools in my back pocket too. So there's a lot that goes along with it.
There is, and you know what? Maybe I would be more successful if I did it because I notice those mundane tasks and I sit down and then I'm like, oh, I'll do it later.
Yeah.
Like I notice consistency, like there's some definite things or putting my head down. I can definitely see doing the things I like versus not. But you know what's interesting? What you said was the lifestyle factors, which is something I teach for years, is that medication can be super helpful with people, but as you said, it's turning inward, knowing that there's not like a magic pill and everything's just going to be butterflies and rainbows afterwards. And maybe for some people that is, but for most people, it really is like, how do I feel? How is this making me feel mentally, physically, emotionally? And I know that when I eat well and move my body, I am way more centered. And I can see it with James when he was going through school, when he had more organized sports and a better diet, and then when he went off on his own, I saw it ramp up because he didn't have the structure, the foundation, the grounding, the like as much movement as he was getting. And the other thing is, it's very different being an adult with a more functioning brain versus a child really trying to instill proper eating habits and movement and really being able to reflect. You don't really get that prefrontal cortex till you're about 25. So before that, it can be more challenging to really dig into what we're talking about. So I love that you shared your journey. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah,
And now
absolutely.
I also know that, we talked about this a little bit on your podcast, that eating disorders are very tied to being ADHD. And I can definitely put my hand up for like a 3-decade long battle with eating. And it's still with me because you have to eat every day. So there's not a day that goes by that I don't have to like self-regulate. There's definitely times I still binge. It's a very, like I was saying to somebody, uh, and when I say food addiction, I don't have an addiction to broccoli or steak or avocados. I have an addiction to the sweet stuff that then lights up my brain, which really helps me. Right. So
Hmm.
again, for some people, it may not be a big issue, but I have to every day, um, like make choices. I really,
Hmm.
I don't, and for somebody who does not have an addictive personality or addiction, that can be really hard, but it takes a lot of my thought um during the day sometimes to get through. Should I eat this? Should I not eat this? How's it going to make me feel? And that's the things that a lot of things that I teach women is really pulling yourself out of the situation and doing a lot of I call it PBA, pause, breathe, ask yourself questions. And that again is an executive function because you're not working from that childlike brain. So I had to do a lot of work on that. And I'm glad that I did. What's your experience been like?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I've struggled with eating my entire life. It all makes so much more sense now that I know more about ADHD.
Mhm.
And I still notice myself going to food as a coping mechanism. And so I remember as a kid, I would get home from school, my mom would be at work, my dad would be at work, and I would eat 3 bowls of chips and have 2 cans of Coke
Mhm.
because I had been so dysregulated from my day at school. Now, this was my way of calming down and calming down my body. So, if I'm going at a pace that I am just crazy during the day, I will often seek food as a regulation technique. And that's been my whole life.
Mhm.
I so I think I shared with you on my podcast just a little bit, but I had bariatric surgery a couple years ago, and it was one of the decisions that I made in my life because I had just been on a diet my whole life. I was over 200 pounds going into 7th grade. I
Mhm.
was so self-conscious, constantly beating myself up and constantly putting myself down in a way that wasn't supporting me.
Mhm.
And I made that decision after reading the book, The Obesity Code. It helped me just really understand a lot about how my body was working. But still, at that point, I didn't know I had ADHD. So I didn't know that I was seeking this out because of a possible deficiency in my brain.
Mhm.
And so I now ask the question when I'm going to seek of something out. Am I seeking this out because I'm actually hungry, or am I seeking this out because I'm lacking something and I'm trying to make myself whole again?
That's
And
me right
there's
there.
this
Yep.
there's this really cool concept in the ADHD community that is getting more popularized, and it's called a dopamine menu,
Mhm.
where there's other ways to fill your cup or get the dopamine that you might be seeking without food or without drugs or without, alcohol. And and there's like a menu you can choose from if you're feeling the need for one of these things, because oftentimes we're lacking something and we're trying to fill it with something that is not necessarily a healthy coping technique. So I've lost 120 pounds, but it's still a struggle because I know where I came from. And then from the eating thing, I then started to seek out alcohol as a way to slow down my brain, as a way to cope with some of the stressors that were happening in life. And so I stopped drinking as well. And so there's some things that I had to do in my own life and made some decisions in a positive way so that I could find a way to live my best life, really, is what my goal was. But yeah, it was a struggle. I from high school, especially high school where there was magazines showing you that skinny is great, right? The skinnier you were, the better it was. I just stopped eating. That was just something I would work out, I played sports, I was a cheerleader, and I constantly was just seeking ways to be in control. And it was strange because one would think, well, why wouldn't you just eat healthier? Right? But I'm not addicted to broccoli. For me, I didn't know how to eat healthy. It wasn't something, my mom was deaf. And so even though she could communicate, it was hard for her to communicate how to eat vegetables, right? In a way that made sense. And then my dad was constantly working, so him and I didn't really talk about that stuff, and all of my siblings had grown up. So there wasn't a lot of talk going on at home. At the same time, I felt like instead of simply choosing to eat healthy, I chose to eat nothing because that felt easier to control. And it almost felt like there was this control aspect of it that I was in control because I wasn't eating anything. And then I had a friend who was doing the same thing and we commiserated, and that's like a whole nother, like, don't find yourself a community. Like that is, but I did, and she's still one of my best friends today, but yeah, it was awful. And then once I started eating again, I would inflate to this point that my body was like, oh, thank God. I remember after I had gone through a period of not eating or binging and purging, I went to the doctor and I was still like I was right at a healthy BMI, but I was seeking help. I was like, "Doctor, can you help me figure out how I can eat healthy again, but not gain all the weight?" Because here's what I'm doing to myself. And I was very open and honest. And he looked at me and he's like, just eat healthy and you'll be fine. And I was like, I think you don't understand what I'm saying. I'm telling you, I have an eating disorder. I don't eat like a normal human. I will eat and then I will throw up and then I will go days without eating. So help me understand how to figure this out. And he was like, yeah, just eat normal because you're healthy right now. And I'm like, I'm not though. Like I might look it, but I'm telling you. So that was a struggle. Like even when I finally wanted to reach out, it was very interesting because I didn't know the right word. At that point, I was like, well, is there anything wrong with, is this just what normal people do? Because a doctor is telling me to just go out in the world and be myself, right? I don't even know what that means. So it's
Yeah.
been a journey.
When people say they're eating healthy, I'm like, okay, let's talk about that because it's we've normalized a certain sense of what we think is healthy that's not healthy. And I think it really depends on your goal. So when I'm talking to women, I'm like, what is your goal? Because it's different if you're trying to lose fat. I like to focus on fat loss versus weight loss. It's different if you're trying to heal your gut. It's different if you're trying to work with your brain. Now, it's different if you're trying to build muscle. Now, it's not drastically different, but I think when you have a real focus, you can narrow in on here are the healthy things to do. Like, let's have some protein, let's work on nature's carbs, let's make sure you're getting healthy fats. What are those healthy fats? Because most people are eating seed oils that they probably have no idea are unhealthy and are causing
Mm,
inflammation in their body. And I see where people have learned this stuff where it's mostly outdated now and they're not getting the current stuff, or they don't think they have to pay attention to it because nothing's wrong, but there could be something wrong. I don't know. They like to confuse us and overwhelm us so that we don't really um dig our teeth in. But I just know from working with women, when you understand what you want, do you want a healthier brain? Do you want to learn how to deal with your ADHD? Do you want to lose fat? When you can just pick one thing for a moment instead of being so scattered and turn into your body and be like, I always say to women, show me what you're eating now and how you're moving, and then let's take the next step and the next step. And we don't need to revamp your entire diet. And, I've been doing this for 30 plus years. There's a lot of education I've learned over the years that, again, I didn't know what you were saying, like the self-regulation bit. I didn't even know I was really self-soothing with food. I couldn't put those words together. And then I was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like that is I can't think of something else to do except for put food in my mouth or alcohol or something. Right.
Right.
So I teach people about a health toolbox, which would be the same as, there's different tools in different situations, and you don't use one hammer to build an entire house. You got to use different tools. And that's kind of what you're helping with. Well, you are helping women with, because
Yeah.
it's not just do this. It's not just do this and everything else is fine. It's like, what do you need? And let's focus in. So thank you for sharing that, because that whole self-regulation, executive function, using food to get that dopamine hit, which I had no idea, right? That dopamine hit, which keeps moving you forward. And right now, have you ever read Dopamine Nation? Uh,
No.
oh my gosh, it's a fascinating book. And she's just talking about how we are just over dopamine hitted right now, like the scrolling, just too much of everything, and just really understanding dopamine. It's a good read, everybody. So
Oh, I'd love to read that. That sounds amazing.
yeah, and you really just start to understand yourself better, right? And you really start to realize that if you go on social media, for example, put a timer on for 5 minutes, because an hour can go by and you've just completely lost yourself. So
Yeah.
yeah, the dopamine is a fascinating thing. Now, one thing we briefly talked about, I don't know if we aired it on your podcast or if we were talking on or off, but you are in this perimenopausal phase right now. And you were kind of like, ooh, I'm kind of like too young. I feel too young to be in it. And so what are your thoughts? Because you said you were talking to some of your friends, and I would just like, you're younger than I am. You're at the beginning of your perimenopausal journey. When I was your age, I knew nothing, right? And these hormones also affect our brain health and all of this other stuff. So it's like, I'd love to hear some of the thoughts going through your head right now, what you're hearing out there as you are starting your perimenopausal journey.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll tell you, when you say that I'm starting my perimenopausal journey, I'm like, oh, you hush over there.
Yeah.
No, I'm like, I'm not. And like, I feel very closed off to accepting that. I know it's real, but I'm not there to say that, okay, let me do some additional research on it. And I think it's just because there's so many other things that I'm trying to understand, right? Like, it's okay, add it to the list. So that's a little bit how I feel. But one thing I did start doing earlier this year when talking to a friend of mine was just tracking my cycle and just understanding how my hormones differ throughout the month. And I will tell you, even just a couple days ago, I I start to talk like a dick to myself. Sorry, can I say that? I'm like I'm I'm kind of a dick to myself like right before I get my period, and I now am recognizing it, and I'll start to look at my calendar, and it's funny because it was it was like a Sunday night. I was like, "Oh, that was really mean." And then I start to look at my calendar and I was like, "Weird. I'm not supposed to get my period until Friday." Well, guess what? It came the next day. And
Right.
I was like, "That's so interesting that I recognized it and looked at my calendar and then it came early." And normally that doesn't happen. I'm pretty regular. So it's pretty interesting to notice some of the differences in how my brain functions at different points in my cycle. And I think just being aware of that as I'm still getting a regular cycle, like, is so helpful to me because I'm just turning inward a little bit more.
Mm.
Whereas, like, full disclosure here, my husband used to track my cycle better than I did for his own selfish reasons. So, like, so now that I'm doing it, I feel more in control of some of the emotions. I also know that I'm better able to function in some of those things that I don't want to do for my business. Like during my period, I am not going to sit down and also do my like bookkeeping. Don't sign me up for that. But when I'm like in my summer phase, as I call it, is I'm going to sit down and do those menial tasks because it's easier for me to do because of the hormones my body is producing. I don't know enough about the hormones in that space, but I think that's what I'm getting used to hearing the word because I think it's becoming more and more of a thing that we talk about, and having the conversations with my friends who are considering hormone replacement therapy to understand, what's different in their life versus what's not different. And so many people are finding out that there's other things that are going wrong with them, right? Like they're just noticing all of these changes. And while I haven't noticed any physical changes yet, I think just being aware of my body and how it works at this point is very helpful to me, because I think as those changes continue to come, I will start to recognize them more and more. Just like as my cycle changes, as different things happen, I just think it's fascinating when you can check in with yourself. But
Oh my gosh, I love you.
there's
I love you. And for all the women that are in your stage of, early perimenopause, which can last, 10 years, right? I love what you just said. Turn inward and really start to, because women are on a 28-day cycle. Men are on a 24-hour clock. When you can start to tap into your 28-day cycle and be like, oh my God, this week I'm super energetic. Oh my gosh, this week I'm coming down, right? Then you learn to be like, this is the week I'm going to do my podcast interviews. This is the week I'm not. This is the week I need to nurture myself more. And when you can start to understand, I love how you put the seasons in. I call them something a little different, but whatever you name them, because one thing that really turned me off learning this for so long was when you talk about the follicular phase. And I was like,
oh yeah.
I can't connect to that. I don't get it. Right. But if you talk about your winter phase where we kind of come inwards a little bit more, we're
Yeah.
nurturing, and put whatever label you need on it, you start to be like, oh my gosh, like it makes sense to me. So don't worry about like having all the technical terms. And I love that it's becoming more conversation, that you're talking about it, because I didn't start tracking my period until I was 48.
Mm.
Right? Because before that, it still wasn't even talked about at
Yeah.
6 years ago.
Right.
So I love that you're starting earlier, and anybody who is younger and just noticing that their period might be a little longer, a little shorter, just pay
Yeah.
attention to that. It affects your mood, it affects your energy, it affects your cravings, it affects your motivation, so many things. And then you can say, like, there's nothing wrong with me. Your hormones are really powerful. And
Yeah.
start to be like, this is kind of cool. Like, this is
Yeah.
kind of cool that I'm
It
feeling,
is.
yes, that I'm feeling energetic, social bunny. And I'll give you something that I've learned is that in that energetic social bunny phase, when everybody's like, do you want to go to this party? Do you want to do this podcast? Do you want to do this? Just have a look on your calendar first and be like, okay, can I get back to you? Because if that's in 3 weeks from now, I don't think I'm going to want to do it. I want
Yeah.
everything today, but
Yeah.
3 weeks from now, when I'm in my winter phase, my nurture phase, I'm going to be like, oh God, why did I say yes?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really cool. And it's funny because I have a work group that I'm in, and this woman messaged us all the other day, and she goes, hey, ladies, do you have any advice? What do you do during your luteal phase? And I was like, oh, shoot, what phase is that? So I had to Google it naturally because it's
Yeah.
not like a regular thing for me. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, I take a lot of bubble baths
Yes.
because, and I like to make sure that I'm not going to my phone to scroll, because I know that when I'm in that phase, or really any phase, let's be honest, I know that there's so many emotions I start to feel when I'm scrolling because each new post gives me a new emotion to feel. So I decide to read a book instead, and I go outside and I smell the fresh air. And so there's some really cool things that I've started to adopt. And I even start to check in on myself and say, okay, like let me look at my to-do list today. Is there something that I can take off of my actual to-do list and I could take a nap instead, or even just lay down and close my eyes to give myself the rest that my body is seeking? And so I think it's just understanding that and then having the conversation. Like, how cool is it that she asked the question and now we're talking about it? Because it's so, I, when I was growing up, it was like, oh, she's PMSing, like, and it was such a negative thing to say, like, yeah, yes, we sure are a little bit more bitchy during this time of the month, but it's also because of like the literal physical things that are happening to our body. And
Exactly.
when we turn inward and start to take care of ourselves a little bit more, um, we're not as much of a bitch. I'm just gonna say that straightforward. Like, because you're taking care of yourself. Like you're putting yourself first so that you can show up for other people still, but still recognizing that you just need a little bit more care and grace during that time.
Absolutely. What a gift. Oh my gosh. I wish I could roll back the clock and be your age and go through, because in my 40s, I was there was this busy badge. It's like, how much can I do? How much recognition can I get? I was stressed, I was depressed, I was anxious, and there was no words, there was nothing about hormones that was, talked about in a way that made sense to me. I found it overwhelming. I'm raising children. I got to get them to
Mm-hmm.
sports. Who has the time? And I just love that it's becoming more of a conversation. And I hope that there's some women that heard those words today about slowing down, tracking your cycle, turning inward. And our progesterone, because it's declining gradually, was the hormone that really helped us deal with anxiety and depression. And so when it's disappearing, that heightens. And so when that heightens, and we don't know the rationale behind it, it can become like there's something wrong with us and that we need to anxiety and depression medications, instead of just being like, okay, no, I'm actually perimenopausal. And here you gave some beautiful tips. Go outside, take something off your to-do, have a nap. I remember
Yeah.
when my kids were young, and they would get off the school bus, and as soon as they walked in the door, I would just hit them hard with like 10 things, right? Because that's, again, just, well, we got to do this, we got to do this, and
Go,
they're like,
go, go. We got time. Yeah,
gotta go,
exactly.
gotta go. And they're like, mom, stop. Right? I just got home from school. They've been on their best behavior all day, right? Talk about self-regulation. Like if we could just,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we could have another whole podcast. They wanted to come home and de-stress from their day,
Yeah.
unwind. And I wasn't giving them the time or the space because of just my unknowing of what I was doing. So I started to implement at 3 o'clock, because they got home at like 4:15. I would be like, I'm gonna pet my dog. I'm gonna read a book.
Ooh,
I'm gonna
that's
go for a walk.
beautiful.
And it completely changed. They came in the door. I was relaxed,
Mm-hmm.
like not firing on them. We had some laughs. But again, it's really taking that moment to notice and own your behavior. And sometimes for your children to point it out
Yeah.
that
And
they,
that's beautiful. Like
yeah,
I planned in with our routine. I remind our girls whenever they get home from school, I'm like, we gotta rest. We gotta have our quiet time. I put together like a box of quiet time activities for them and things that we can do to just like decompress from the day. We don't do homework right away. We do have snacks, right? And like sometimes I'll make them dinner right after school now because they're so hungry from not like, having snacks all day like summer. And it's been fascinating to see. But like that's so interesting because I think if I didn't implement a routine like that and say like we're literally gonna have quiet time, I would be the same way. I'm like, what's next? Let's do this, right? But it's
yeah.
it's kitten.
If you Megs has her cat, and she's it's very cute. No, but
He
again,
was like having zoomies all over the room, so I had to pick him up. Okay.
yes, that's fun. That's fun. Well, this has been fantastic, because I think for anybody going through, I think the important message for me, which really helped my son as well, is that there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with you. We all have different brains. We all function a little differently. And I love the piece. I hope everybody can resonate with turning inward and really just this gift. You've been given this gift of this brain, this body, this space in this life. And how can you use your gifts? Do you need some help? Do you need some lifestyle tweaks? And I always say, watch yourself like a movie. And the first step is really just, get to know yourself, get to know when you're reactionary, get to know what's triggering you, get to be like, oh, that's interesting. Why did I do that? Right. And then just start to sit back and decide what your next step is. And I think we've given lots of people some great tips today. So any last words and where people can find you? And you also have a great freebie on your website you can tell people about.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is mindfulmegs.com. I spend a lot of my social media time on Instagram and TikTok, where I am at organizing an ADHD brain is my tagline. There's periods in between the words.
I'll put that up.
Other than that, yeah, I have you can book right on my website if you're interested in working with me via coaching or virtual decluttering. I do that as well, and I coach you through decluttering a space. I'd love to chat with you, or my podcast, which is Organizing an ADHD Brain. So, oh, and my freebie, and I did a podcast episode on this as well. It's a to-do list download that I made for myself, and it's how to figure out really like what you can actually do in a day, and it's how to time box it and how to figure out like, oh, I can't actually do all of this stuff, right? And so what can I do? And giving yourself the grace to get things done that you can. Life doesn't happen perfectly, but this is what I've created for myself, and I have it as a free download on my website. So go check it out. There's an accompanying podcast, two podcast episodes that go along with it to show you how to use it and how you can start to adopt it in your own life, but in your own way. Like, what does this look like for you? Because I'm just telling you how I use it. But just like you said earlier, we're all so different. We're all just trying to make it by. And even if you took one thing away from today's episode and our conversation, that is all you need to. You don't have to take notes. Don't revisit it. Just listen to the episode again if you need to.
And I will say Meg's episodes that go along with the to-do list, I listened to them, and before we hit record today, I said I found them very helpful because
Awesome.
and I believe, like, even hearing this podcast today, you will only hear 10%. And so if you listen to it again, you will pick up another 10% and you will plant another seed. And so if you are, and this is what I've learned and how to slow down, because even in my working life, like I teach Pilates and yoga and weightlifting and HIIT and personal train and group coaching and health coaching and nutrition and mindset and CPR. Like I am all over the place. It actually works for me. And I dig deeper into those things, but where was I going with this? There's my brain. There's my brain fart. Uh, oh my gosh, I totally
Oh, so you were talking about the schedule podcast and how you took something away from it, even though like you're doing so much and it
oh,
works, right?
yes, the planting of the seeds, doing what you can do. Oh, and then when you listen to it, you've observed yourself, you can start to, I think, put into practice some of the things better. That's what I got out of that. And I can really see how sometimes I think medication would help me calm myself down right now
Yeah.
and get more level. Like it's very interesting self-reflection. Anyway, I will
Yeah.
work on that. Well, thank you so very much for being with me today. I've loved all your advice, your help, your stories. I find stories are wonderful. And I will leave all the show notes, and to my listeners, if this podcast resonated with you today, please share it with somebody, because this information is so helpful, because there's nothing wrong with us at all. Nothing. We're all
Yeah.
unique. We're all a gift, and we can shine our star very brightly when we can understand ourselves better. So please share, subscribe, and like, and I will see you on the next podcast. And thanks, Megs, for being here.
Thanks for having me. It was an honor.